The beginning of Genesis presents us with a very odd story about two trees, one that gives life and one that gives knowledge. Christian tradition tends to impose a very restrictive interpretation of this story, and our familiarity often blinds us to some of its stranger details. A close read, however, reveals a text full of ambiguities, internal debates, forgotten traditions, and unresolved questions about its intended meaning. Unlike the tale of Noah's flood, there is no close parallel in older Mesopotamian literature that can point us to the origins of the Garden of Eden narrative. In this video, I want to focus on the two special trees of Eden in particular. Why do they matter so much to the tale of the first humans? What exactly do they do? I also want to know the Near Eastern context of the two trees and how the original audience would have understood them. As I explore these topics, I'll share some of the academic theories that I find most compelling. The Eden story in Genesis 2 begins in a primordial time when there is no vegetation, because Yahweh has not sent the rain, and there is no one to till the ground. Yahweh creates a man out of the dust of the ground and breathes life into him. Then Yahweh plants a garden in Eden and puts the man there. Next it says, "And Yahweh Elohim made to grow out of the ground all trees pleasant to look at and good for food, and the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of knowing good and evil." The most natural understanding of this sentence is that the tree of life is in the middle of the garden, while the location of the tree of knowledge is not specified. Now, in 1997, a German scholar named Andreas Michel proposed that a feature of Hebrew syntax called split coordination would allow the phrase "in the middle of the garden" to apply to both trees. Some commentators accept this explanation, while others dispute it. Even if Michel is correct, the syntax is so rare that the Septuagint translators didn't recognize it, so the Greek Septuagint explicitly places only the tree of life in the center of the garden. Philo of Alexandria, an early Jewish philosopher and exegete, believed that the tree of knowledge was in fact outside the garden. Anyway, after Yahweh puts the man in the garden, he tells the man about the tree of knowledge and forbids eating from it, but does not mention the tree of life. "You may eat freely of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of knowing good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall die." From this point until the story's conclusion, the characters and the narrator always refer to the tree in the singular. In Genesis 3:3, the woman tells the snake that it is the tree in the middle of the garden that is forbidden, and from context, she must be referring to the tree of knowledge, even though in Genesis 2:9, it was the tree of life in the middle of the garden. It's not obvious whether the man, the woman, and the snake even know about the tree of life, which plays no role at all in the story until the very end. Because of these peculiarities, many prominent scholars of Genesis have concluded that the original form of the story had only one tree. The current form of the text with two trees is either the result of a second tree being added, or the result of combining two variants of the story. The latter option is endorsed by Howard Wallace, who says that it is the most reasonable explanation of the present situation, especially considering that only one tree is essential for the story, and there is some confusion between the trees. We'll come back to this idea, but first, let's consider what the trees are supposed to do. The Tree of Knowledge. Hebrew specialists say that the name of this tree is a bit awkward, and means something like the tree of knowing good and evil. It's even worse in Greek, the tree for knowing what is knowable of good and evil. I'm calling it the Tree of Knowledge for short. The story tells us that the tree is desirous because it brings wisdom and it opens the eyes of the man and woman, making them like gods. But what kind of knowledge does this tree actually provide? Scholars have proposed at least 3 different interpretations. One is that the tree grants ethical discernment. Maybe before eating, the man and women were like children without moral comprehension of the world around them. This presents some clear difficulties within the story, however. Eating the fruit supposedly makes the man and women like gods, but Wallace notes that moral discernment itself does not make one godlike. Eckhart Otto describes it as a paradox that disobedience is required in order to obtain moral discernment, and John Day asks why God would want humans to remain ignorant of basic mature wisdom. The second option is that the tree provides sexual knowledge. Within the story, that does make some sense, since the man and woman become aware of their nakedness only after eating the fruit, and they procreate only after their banishment from the garden. Against this interpretation, Day argues that sexual knowledge is never described elsewhere in the Bible as knowing good and evil. Wallace asks why Yahweh would prohibit humans from procreating. Handel says that knowledge of bodily nakedness is hardly godlike knowledge. The third option, preferred by many scholars today, is that good and evil is a merism, a phrase that uses two opposites to imply the totality of everything in between. This would mean that the humans obtained universal knowledge by eating the fruit. A weaker version of this view would be that it describes all the basic qualities of humanity, like independence, self-determination, and civilization. But as Day points out, the knowledge possessed by the man and women after eating the fruit does not seem to fit this description. The challenge is that all of these possibilities are evoked at various points in the story, as Ronald Handel puts it, sometimes intersecting, sometimes conflicting with one another. It's almost like the storyteller doesn't have any specific kind of knowledge in mind. What then is the point of the narrative? The Tree of Life. The Tree of Life is neglected until the very end, when Yahweh declares, "See, the humans have become like one of us, knowing good and evil, and now they might reach out their hands and also take from the Tree of Life and eat and live forever." To prevent the humans from becoming immortal, Yahweh expels them from the garden and sets cherubim and a flaming sword as guards. We are left with several unanswered questions, such as, were the humans created mortal, or did they become mortal by eating the forbidden fruit? If they were created mortal, could they have eaten from the Tree of Life before the Tree of Knowledge? Do the humans even know of the Tree of Life's existence? If not, then who is it actually for? While these questions are worthwhile, we risk falling into the trap of taking the story too literally. Those of us raised in a religious environment are often conditioned to treat the tale as something that actually happened in historical time, instead of embracing the mythic worldview of its authors. In his book on the Eden story, the late Trygve Mettinger explains what should perhaps be obvious. The two trees are symbols, which he defines as any physical, social, or cultural act or object that serves as a vehicle for a conception. The story of Eden is a theological allegory, and to understand that allegory, we need to understand the symbolic function of trees in other passages of the Bible, as well as the wider ancient world. As Michaela Box explains in a 2012 paper, interpretations of the trees in the Garden of Eden misunderstand their significance by focusing on sin or theological fall. A tradition-historical approach to the motif of trees in ancient Near Eastern literature and imagery reveals their multivalent quality. Trees lend themselves naturally to concepts like life, nourishment, abundance, and fertility, and Tree of Life symbolism appears often in the iconography of the Levant. Since the phrase Tree of Life is fairly rare, however, the term sacred tree is a safer term to use. According to Amy Ballag, several elements distinguish symbolic trees from regular trees in the iconographic record, such as the combination of elements from different species, unnatural symmetry, and the tree's dominant position within a composition. In the ancient Levant, we often see depictions of a sacred tree flanked by goats or ibexes that are nourished by it. The tree is sometimes accompanied by, or even replaced by, the Egyptian symbol for life, the Ankh. The tree is often surrounded by worshippers and a god or goddess, or by guardian sphinxes and griffins. This scarab seal from Iron Age Jerusalem shows a sacred tree with two Ankh symbols. The reverse side has an inscription that says, "Amun gives life." Several others like it are known from other parts of Israel. The tree itself may be identified with a fertility goddess, as seen in this pyxis lid from Ugarit, in which a goddess, possibly Asherah, takes the place of the tree between two feeding caprids. This inscription from a jar in Kuntaled Adrud, a site near the border of ancient Judah, depicts a stylized tree widely believed to represent Asherah that is flanked by caprids. It is accompanied by a blessing in the name of Yahweh and Asherah. The positioning above the lion might also be significant, since fertility goddesses were often shown standing on lions. Several scholars believe that the mysterious pillar figurines that are found by the thousands in late Iron Age Judah represent a new form of sacred tree iconography, with a tree trunk forming the lower part of the goddess's body. The close association between the fertility goddess and a sacred tree is also seen in numerous amulets from Israel and Syria that combine the image of Asherah with a tree and emphasize aspects of her fertility. Jeremiah 17:2 describes Judah as having altars to Asherah beside every verdant tree on hilltops throughout the land. A fragmentary text from ancient Ugarit to the north of Israel describes a magical tree of death that grows near the Tigris River. It is used by the god Horanu to cure a snakebite and restore El's garden. Several interpreters think this tree is functionally equivalent to the Tree of Life despite its name. In Egypt, tree and plant symbolism often had the sense of eternal nutrition and sustenance in the afterlife, as in this image of the sky goddess Nut, depicted as a sycamore tree who gives food and water to the deceased. The Tree of Life is specifically mentioned in an ancient Egyptian hymn to the creator Atum. You are the sole one who has created all that is, the single sole one who created what exists, from whose eyes humankind came forth, and from whose pronouncement the gods came into existence, creator of the fodder on which the cattle live, and the tree of life for people. There are at least 2 other examples of Egyptian creation hymns that mention the Tree of Life. While Nut was often shown as a sacred sycamore tree, Osiris came to be depicted as a sacred willow tree that symbolized the annual vegetation cycle and the concept of resurrection. Assyrian palaces featured elaborate relief carvings of a sacred tree together with the king and bird-headed Apkallus, minor divinities linked to agricultural abundance. The Apkallus are carrying out some kind of ritual act that may involve fertilizing the tree. The sun deity is usually positioned overhead. Overall, these compositions symbolize the Assyrian king and the blessings of the god Ashur provided through the king. The symbolism is both cosmic and social. Lastly, sacred trees often stand as markers of a holy place where a god and humans meet. In many cases, gardens may serve as sacred spaces and as microcosms for the ideal world. Assyrian temple gardens in particular appear to represent life and divine blessings. And as mentioned earlier, religious shrines in Israel were often built near trees. The Jerusalem temple, as described in 2 Kings and Ezekiel, features trees as a prominent design motif in the inner sanctuary. One form that the sacred tree often takes is that of the world tree. World tree is a modern coinage, but it describes a mythological tree found often in ancient literature that represents divinity and the cosmic order. An example is the black Kishkanu tree mentioned in Babylonian writings. According to one text, it spreads across the underworld and the cosmic ocean called the Apsu. Its foliage resembles lapis lazuli gemstones, and 2 great rivers, most likely the Tigris and Euphrates, spring from its roots. Similarly, the Era epic describes sacred Mesu trees whose roots reach down to the underworld and whose treetops reach to the sky. A story called Inanna and the Hulupu tree, which was appended to Tablet 12 of the Gilgamesh epic, tells of the great Hulupu tree, which had been planted beside the Euphrates at the dawn of creation. The goddess Inanna replants the tree in her sacred garden in Uruk, but it becomes infested with a snake that cannot be charmed, the Anzu bird, and the demoness Lilith. Inanna calls upon Gilgamesh, the hero of Uruk, to come and dispel them for her. This tradition of a cosmic tree of great height, located near the Euphrates River or in a divine garden, with roots that reach down to the Apsu, seems to be widespread in the Near East. But what does it have to do with Eden? Well, for one thing, we find just such a tree in Ezekiel. Chapter 31 compares Assyria to the most magnificent cedar tree in Eden, the Garden of God. This tree has its top in the clouds, and its roots reach down to the Tehom, the Hebrew name for the Apsu or ocean of the underworld. Rivers flow out from where the tree is planted, and all nations live in its shade. A similar world tree appears in Ezekiel 17, which describes the salvation of Israel as a cedar sprig planted on a high and lofty mountain. It becomes a noble cedar that bears fruit, and all the birds dwell beneath it. Wallace points out that the mention of the fruit, anomalous in the context of the cedar, makes sense if we see the background of the image being the sacred tree planted on the mountain dwelling of the deity. Another passage about Eden, this time in Ezekiel 28, mentions a covering of carnelian, lapis lazuli, and other gemstones, and Henrik Pfeiffer argues in his study on Eden that this word refers to the foliage of the same world tree described in Ezekiel 31 and in Babylonian literature. Pfeiffer believes that the tree in the middle of the garden in Genesis should also be interpreted as the world tree, and that the snake in the Eden story might be influenced by the tradition of the hulupu tree. As we've seen, the sacred tree in the ancient Near East was a multivalent symbol that could represent life, abundance, divine blessings, fertility, kingship, and cosmic order. It was often part of the garden of a king or god. It's easy to see how these ideas intersect with the Garden of Eden and the creation of the world. Sacred trees, however, have little or no association with knowledge and wisdom. Where does that connection come from? The solution might lie in the book of Proverbs, which mentions the tree of life in 4 separate passages. The most important is Proverbs 3, a chapter with major implications for understanding Genesis. Happy are those who find wisdom and those who get understanding. For her income is better than silver, and her revenue better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold her fast are called happy. According to the author of Proverbs, what does the tree of life symbolize? Wisdom, knowledge, understanding. Knowledge is the greatest thing a person can aspire to because it leads to peace, happiness, riches, honor, and long life. Box concludes, the acquisition of knowledge is therefore the highest goal for human beings. It signifies life. To the author of Proverbs, knowledge is life, and life is knowledge. It's the same metaphorical tree. If the tree of life was associated with knowledge in Israelite tradition, this reinforces the argument that the original Eden story was about one tree that gave knowledge, rather than 2 trees with different functions. But even if that is the case, the exaltation of wisdom in Proverbs introduces significant tension when read alongside the Eden story. In that text, the pursuit of wisdom violates Yahweh's intentions for humankind. In fact, renowned Old Testament scholar David M. Carr argues in a 1993 paper that Genesis 2 and 3 in its final form is a polemic against the wisdom tradition of the Bible. Carr makes his point by comparing the Eden story in Genesis to the Song of Wisdom in Proverbs 8. In this song, a female wisdom figure calls for her audience to seek her because of her early role in God's creation. This role in creation then makes it possible for her to grant fame, prosperity, long life, and divine favor to those who seek her. Likewise, in the Garden of Eden story, a female figure is prominent in creation and then plays the dominant role in the search for independent, wisdom-like knowledge of good and evil. But this search is evaluated quite differently in Genesis 2 and 3 than in Proverbs 8. Ultimately, the outcome of the Eden story is that humans receive wisdom but must forego immortality as a result. Far from being unique, this lesson is one that Mesopotamian literature had been exploring long before Judahite scribes wrote the book of Genesis. The mortality of humans is the topic of numerous ancient wisdom texts, and there are some well-known tales in which a human protagonist loses a chance to consume a food or drink that would grant immortality. In Adapa and the South Wind, a story that predates Genesis by over 1,000 years, there is a man named Adapa, created by the water god Ea as a prototype for other humans. The story begins by telling us that Ea has given Adapa great wisdom but not eternal life. To him, Ea had given wisdom. Eternal life he had not given him. The most wise among the Anunnaki is he. One day while Adapa is out fishing, the south wind capsizes Adapa's boat and dumps him into the sea. Adapa curses the south wind, and it stops blowing for 7 days. The god Anu is upset and summons Adapa up to heaven to explain himself. Before Adapa goes, Ea commands Adapa not to consume any bread or water that the gods offer him, because if he does, he will die. Sure enough, when Adapa arrives at the gates of Anu, a god named Ningisida, whose symbol is the snake, by the way, offers Adapa bread of life and water of life. Remembering Ea's words, Adapa refuses, and when Anu finds out, he laughs because the bread and water would have made Adapa immortal. Ea had lied to Adapa to ensure that he would remain immortal in Ea's service. Because of Adapa's decision, Anu decrees that humanity will always be inferior to the immortal gods. The story serves as a fable to explain why humanity cannot possess both wisdom and immortality. A similar theme shows up in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, like Adapa, is given great wisdom and knowledge, but his attempts to gain immortality fail. At one point, he learns of the legendary plant of life growing in the Apsu which, if eaten, can restore a person's youth. Gilgamesh manages to find one and intends to bring it home. However, while Gilgamesh is bathing, a snake steals the plant and slithers away, sloughing off its skin as it goes. From this tragedy, Gilgamesh learns the bitter lesson that immortality is meant only for the gods, not for humans. A character named Shiduri tells Gilgamesh, "Life which you seek you cannot find. When the gods created humankind, for humankind they established death. Life they kept for themselves." Although we cannot say for certain whether the Yahwist author of Genesis took inspiration from these tales, it is possible and even likely that he knew of them, Gilgamesh especially. Allusions to Gilgamesh are found throughout the Hebrew Bible, and Richard J. Clifford observes that Genesis 2:15, in which God takes the man and settles him in the Garden of Eden, seems to copy the wording of a line in Gilgamesh where the gods take Utnapishtim, the flood hero, and settle him in Dilmun, the Sumerian Eden. By the way, snakes, like trees, are a multivalent symbol that appear often in stories like these. Their ability to slough off their skin and be reborn creates a natural association with immortality, but their dangerous venom links them with death and chaos. What have we learned from all this? Sacred trees as symbols are found in iconography and literature throughout the ancient Near East, where they represent life, nourishment, fertility, abundance, kingship, cosmic order, and sacred spaces where humans can encounter the divine. In Israel and Syria, sacred trees were an intrinsic part of folk religion and could represent the goddess Asherah. Many of these elements are echoed in the tradition of a sacred garden that underlies the Eden passages of Genesis and Ezekiel. The book of Proverbs develops the tree of life concept in a new direction, linking it to the pursuit of wisdom. Wisdom, described as a personified entity by Proverbs, was already present at the creation of the world, and it is the highest goal that humans can hope to attain. The Yahwist author of the early chapters of Genesis, however, saw things differently. He took a pre-existing tradition about the sacred garden and the tree of life, and combined it with a popular story motif in which humanity receives wisdom but is denied eternal life. In his version of the story, the ability to learn, grow, and strive for knowledge is not a virtue, but something Yahweh tried to withhold from us. A similar attitude is demonstrated a few chapters later in the Babel story, in which Yahweh is dismayed at humanity's ability to work together and build a monumental city. There, he puts a stop to their achievements by confusing their language. He acts much like Ea in the Babylonian literature, as a trickster deity who wants to hold humanity back, for reasons that are often difficult to understand. It's also possible that the author was writing at a time when the Torah of Moses was rising in prominence, bringing the idea of a superior law code mandated by God into conflict with the philosophers who saw wisdom as a universal ideal that all humans could pursue. This is not, of course, the only way to interpret the Eden story, and by focusing on the tree motif, there are many elements I have ignored, like the remarkable parallels between Eve and Pandora in Greek literature. That will have to wait for another video. In any case, the diverse viewpoints on Eden and the Tree of Life that we find in the Bible remind us that it is not a univocal instruction book, but a record of ancient debates and disagreements. To be faithful readers, we must acknowledge its inherent discord and be open to new and unexpected viewpoints.
Yo, have you dudes sampled this fruit? It's like God's private stash.
But he said it was forbidden.
Quite so, Mum. I recall one of the dinosaurs had a bite, and well, that was the last of... Egad!
Please stop eating that. God's going to be furious.
You're pretty uptight for a naked chick.